started here. And I want to kick things off, keep it simple. So we spend most of the time talking about maker activities, maker culture, maker spaces, and really hearing from Sherri, one of our Adobe Education leaders, about what she's doing with her students inside of school. And as I think some of you just heard in the pre-show or pre-game activity, doing in the community as well through other organizations, but still working directly with students. So let me just first welcome everyone to today's Adobe Education Professional Development webinar series. This is part of an EdSurge article that went out, I believe, a week or two ago um, that looked at some of the work in maker movement, maker culture, and maker spaces, and particularly looked at Jeff Larson's work that he does in Balboa High School in San Francisco. And today's webinar is a follow-up to that, which is, as I said, Sherri Kushner, Adobe Education Leader, looking at the work that she does in her school. And if I remember this correctly, Sherri, you're teaching 6th through 8th graders at, is it Chute Middle School in, is it Evanston or Evanstown,
Correct.
Illinois?
Yep.
Great. Um, and tell us a little bit about your class, sort of who's there, who are the kids, what kind of activities do you do in this media arts class?
Okay. Well, my program began about 7 years ago, and currently we do an arts rotation where students will get a trimester of arts. So I switch with visual arts, music, and drama, and then they've added a rotation of media arts. So I see the students every day for 12 weeks, and we're on the south side of Evanston, so it's just north of Chicago, and we have a pretty diverse community socioeconomically and racially. I would say about 30% African American, 30% Latino, and 30% white. And our district actually, we have a lot of funding from the district in terms of technology, which is how we're able to have a Mac lab, which is my media arts lab. Um, but in terms of the community itself, um, we actually have about 60% of our student population is on free and reduced lunch, and we are considered a Title I school. So I'll actually be talking today about some outside funding opportunities that we've looked into in order to build our makerspace.
Oh, terrific. Well, thanks for that introduction there. I'll say for anybody tuning in who just joined us, if you have questions throughout today's conversation and presentation, we've got a chat pod here in the bottom left for any direct questions. Hey, Peter, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Um, but for the most part, Sherri, should I switch over to the share screen and you can do the presentation right now?
Mhm.
Sure. And Sherri, maybe to kind of kick things off and really frame your presentation today and this conversation discussion, can you talk a little bit about what maker means to you and sort of what maker space means to you? I think we're hearing a lot of definitions, a lot of people defining it in their own way in their own communities. I'm curious, as an educator who is working hands-on with their community of students, what is maker? How do you present it in the class? How do you talk about it?
Okay, so I think the difference for me, I've started out, my class was a traditional media arts classroom. So the students are largely on computers, they're creating movies, they're creating work in Photoshop, photography. Um, and I think the maker section for us, we got a 3D printer, we got a vinyl cutter, and I think we changed the approach to teaching rather than students working just at their seats or in small groups at the computer. It was more about having an open space where they could work together to create things, to tinker and play and experiment, not necessarily with the objective of having a final project, but more just learning how things work and how things can be repurposed or remade um, in order to create something and make it something that students were interested in. So I guess for me, that's how we've expanded into Maker. Um, we don't really distinguish a makerspace from the regular classroom. I think a lot of the approaches are similar, being flexible, learning to fail, um, and I guess focusing more on the process too of creating rather than just a final product for us.
Mm,
Can you see
I
my
like
screen
that
okay?
idea. Yeah, you look great on this side.
Okay. All right. Can I go ahead and start then?
Go for it.
Okay, all right. So I'll just show you here the way that we've kind of divided up my classroom. So I have 27 Mac computers on one end, and then on the other end is where we've added the 3D printing and more of the maker section. So you can see two of our sixth grade students here seeing a 3D printer for the first time. And for me, I think that's what these maker activities have really provided are more opportunities for students to use tools and equipment that they wouldn't normally have access to. So here's just a glimpse of my classroom. And on the top right, you can see kind of the general setup. Like I said, 27 student stations. Usually my classes are between 20 to 25 students. We do use the Apple TV to go live often on the front screen. I like my students to be able to share their stuff as they're working. Again, focus on the process. Um, and then on the bottom left, you can see the back of the classroom. So on the left side, we've added a shelf for 3D printer filament and tripods, green screen. And then in the very back, you see on the top left, we have two MakerBot printers and one M3D, kind of a smaller 3D printer. And there's a vinyl cutter next to that. So things to know, we actually went one-to-one iPad a couple years ago through Digital Promise. And our school was selected as one of 8 in the nation where Digital Promise gave every student an iPad. And so I think that's really changed the attitude for students. Before, not all of our students had internet at home, and now they'll all have an iPad to take. There's a lot of apps that we were able to use to create things. And so I think students are now doing media in all of their other classes because they've got the iPad. And so I think as part of this maker movement, we wanted to just show them different apps that they can use to make a variety of things, not just print media, but objects, etc. So there's just a glimpse. And I wanted to address funding because I think that's something that everybody always asks. Well, you're in a Title I school. How are you affording these really expensive 3D printers? And I will tell you, 2 years ago, I was at the ISTE conference, which is kind of the International Technology Conference, and I was seeing all of these 3D printers and all of the things that people were able to make. I like that problem-based design, and I wanted to do that in my classroom, but we didn't have the equipment. But actually, our public library did. So something that I would recommend that we've done is we formed a partnership with our public library, and we went to our foundation. So our foundation offers mini grants of up to $3,000 to do innovative programs. And I wrote up a summer class so that we would do 2 summer classes in partnership with the library so that we could actually pilot the software. So we had students working in SketchUp and Tinkercad, and then on the 4th day of the class, they would actually go to the library with their files and get them printed at the library. And so that was our way to kind of test things out, even though we didn't have the equipment in our class. And of course, it was so popular with the students. So then we looked at how can we get the funding. And I would say, as a school teacher, one of the best ways is to go to your PTA. So you can see, this is my student Nate on the top right and his family at one of our art shows. And Nate's family actually had requested that the school get Minecraft because their son was really interested. He's a real visual learner, and he liked kind of the gaming as part of school. So his family offered a really generous donation towards Minecraft. And I said, well, actually, maybe we can break up this money and part of it can go towards the education version of Minecraft. And the other part of it could go towards a 3D printer. And then we could see about 3D printing things that student had created in Minecraft. So that's how we got the Replicator 2. And then we soon realized that one printer to print 350 students' work over the course of the year was not going to work out, right? And for me, I think the equity piece was really important. All of the students were so excited about the 3D printer, I wanted to make sure that everybody had access. So in order to get the second printer, I went to Donors Choose and wrote up a grant there. And I will say I didn't feel comfortable going to my community and asking for donations. We had a lot of alum that happened to see Evanston on there and said, oh, I'd like to contribute. I went to high school there, or I went to middle school. Um, but what we actually did was they met our funding halfway. Another organization was looking for arts and maker grants. So they met us halfway, so that cut the price in half. And then we were able to just take, it was like $200 of donations that we got elsewhere. And then the other $800, we actually did fundraising on our own. And I'm going to talk about some of the fundraising opportunities that were actually, the students came up with them. And I think they've become part of our maker activities where the students are making things that get sold and then the money can come back to our program. And I really like that model a lot because I think the students come up with the ideas of things that they actually want to create themselves. They learn how to do it, and then they kind of get the entrepreneurship piece as well, where they learn how to set the cost, what audience of students can buy it. You know, we have different price ranges of things, and maybe not all things are sold. Maybe some things we make for everyone, or we make for specific groups. And then the final thing, if you look on the bottom left, we have Little Bits. We're actually donated to the library for schools to use. So I know in our community we have the library. And then I spoke a little bit before the chat started here. Our YMCA also received a generous donation to create a makerspace for middle schoolers. And so that's another free space that students have in our community to do 3D printing. And so we've done a lot of partnerships with them. Right now I'm actually teaching a class in the morning. And I think it's really important to get on board with any either public library or community space in your community that has equipment so that your students have access to everything and that you can share resources. Okay, so one of the first fundraisers that we started actually about 4 years ago, one of the classes I teach is an advanced media class, and it's all 8th graders that try out to take the class. Instead of having a rotation of 12-week classes, they take just media arts every day for a year. And I let the students set their own projects. They write up goals and projects that they want to tackle, often in groups or longer term. And then I help them find ways to make them work. So one of the students said, wouldn't it be cool if we could make shirts for our basketball team? And so the students already knew Photoshop and they learned how to create logos in Photoshop. But then we said, all right, well, how can we get them onto apparel? Like, it was really expensive to go through another company and we wanted to do it ourselves. So we found the Silhouette Cameo machine. And the Silhouette Cameo runs about $250. And it will cut paper, it will cut wax paper, it will cut the mask ease that we use for silk screening, it will cut vinyl. And so I think even in the 4 years since we've started this, they've come out with now these like iron-on vinyl and places that we're still looking to explore. But we did it very basically. We said, okay, we know that we can take our logo from Photoshop, put it in the Silhouette Cameo software, and actually print out the silk screen mask. So we use mask ease, which we buy from Dick Blick. And then, so the students learn how to make their own screens and just using the sticky paper. And then they put the screen, we ordered our sweatpants from a company called, I think it's Jiffy Shirts. And so they have kind of low prices. The students are able to pick their look. And we started out just doing t-shirts, and then students said, oh, what if we had sweatpants? What if we had sleeveless shirts? And it's really expanded. Every year, students have a new idea. It's kind of become a thing that students look forward to. What kind of apparel will we use next? And so we started. The students use fabric paint, and they silk screen them. And what I love about this process, you can see all of the different things. So we started off just the soccer team, and then the basketball team wanted some. You can see on the bottom, my advanced media arts class did it. On the left bottom is the design from last year, and then the second picture on the bottom is from this year. Our slam poetry team wanted shirts, and they actually had a separate grant for their slam poetry team, so we were able to get funding there. Um, and then you can see on the bottom right, I didn't want to make it something that we're always selling this apparel, because there's a lot of students that were interested in it that maybe couldn't afford it or weren't a part of these different sports teams. So there's a student on my right who's in my regular 12-week 8th grade classes, and I offer that as an option for students, that they're able to create their own shirt. And what we've used below here is freezer paper. And so when you do it, you have to flip it upside down, because the freezer paper you actually will iron on, and it's easier to cut the side face up. So we flip it down, and then students are able to just paint. So it's kind of like a mask, and that's how we get, if you look on the top middle picture, parent, that's how we get the students' names. And so we have 2 price points. We decided one would just be for the logo, and the other one is if you want the logo and the name. And students love being able to customize. Sometimes they customize it with their last name or their sports number. We've done all different things, and so that was something that we added on that was really popular. You can see on the 4th picture on the top right, that's my son Pele. And what I wanted you to notice is in the background, our musical this year was Shrek the Musical. And so we actually had a student who was not even in my class. She had a major role in the production, and so she made herself a shirt using this logo. And somebody saw it and said, oh, we should use that logo for the shirt. So she brought that logo to my class, and this poster was actually made by like 4 or 5 different students. So one student had the idea for the logo and brought it in. I had another student trace it, scan it, bring it into Photoshop. And then I had another group actually do the design for the poster. And if you can see in the back the castle and the drawbridge, that was actually a colored pencil drawing done by one of the advanced art students. And we had several students from the advanced art class submit drawings, and then my students picked for the poster. And I think that's one of the defining features of what we call maker activities, is this idea that a lot of students are participating. It's really real world, right? Someone's doing the logo, the design, the background drawing, and everyone's coming together to make this larger product. And so from there, we add the logo and we use it for the shirts. And you can see we even made child sizes for some of the staff's kids. Here's the next slide. So here's actually the creation process for the shirts. You can see on the top left. And this is a great way just for beginning students who are learning Photoshop. You can see all the students place their orders on a sheet. And then my students have to go through the sheets and kind of gather the last names and kind of do a spreadsheet of what everyone ordered. So there's kind of the business piece. There's a little bit of math involved. But even just picking the font and typing the names is just a basic exercise in learning text and design. And then they have to kind of figure out how to space it. So we figured 3 per sheet, and then we can kind of cut them down the middle. A lot of students, if you would believe, don't know how to iron yet. So I found that that's a useful skill, and I actually have all of my classes help with the ironing. Sometimes when we get into a heavy season with girls and boys basketball, we might have 50 or 60 orders of apparel. And the way that it works is once you iron on the freezer paper, you paint it in with a fabric paint. It takes about an hour to dry. And then you iron it. You put like a piece of fabric over to iron the front. And then you flip it inside out and iron it from the back. And I always, just to make sure that everything sets properly, I have them do about 3 minutes on each side. So it's 6 minutes per piece of clothing, which is a long time if you think about it. So I love getting, and you can see on the far right, I had like a whole class. We set up about 10 irons, and everybody participated. For our Shrek musical, once everyone from the cast had ordered, and the orchestra and the teachers, we ended up printing over 200 shirts. So the students really got a sense of how to do the silk screening process, the setting, and kind of working on the business side. Like they had to go back then and divide up all the shirts and label them and distribute. So I think students, after this experience, they would know how to run a business. They would know how to make a product and be able to sell it, which I think is a good skill for them down the road, kind of teaching them to be entrepreneurial, how to advertise. They actually made all of the flyers that we gave to the students. So they made flyers to hang around the school in Photoshop. and then they also made all the order forms. So it's good experience for them figuring out how to communicate using images and text, making sure the directions for ordering and where to turn it in were really clear, and the price. So all those things were really essential to this process. And like I said, it was so popular. Students all the time are coming to me. What if we make headbands? What if we make, they had an idea this year to get tie-dye shirts and use vinyl to iron it on so they could get a lighter color on a darker color. So we're constantly testing new equipment. There's new processes of fabric dyeing. And again, I think that's what the maker movement is about. The kids are getting excited to, now that they have this process, how can we expand? What else can we try that's new? Okay, so another thing that we focus on is the iteration process. One of the ideas also new this year is that the students really like these elite socks, the Nike Elite, and so they're expensive. They're like $20 socks. And I said, I don't know if that's going to go over in our school. And the kids said, no, everybody wears them. Let's try. I said, all right, fine. So you can see on the top left, that was their very first idea for a design. And actually, once they pitched the idea and a couple kids heard about it, I had kids in different classes just kind of creating designs and pitching them. So we started with the top design. And we went online. We said, look, I don't know that we could make these socks in-house. They're kind of complicated. And I was concerned that if we were, with the shirts, they're like $3 or $4 each. So if you mess up, it's not a big deal. But with a pair of elite socks, that retail maybe $15 for the white sock, I was concerned about messing them up. In the past, we've had students try tie-dyeing socks, and they actually spilled the dye, and it was a big disaster. So I said, let's farm it out for the actual making, but you design it. So they designed the top left one, sent it to the company, and the designer got back to them and said, look, we can't do these letters in the back like that. How else do you want to do the sock? Well, meantime, on the top middle, my students came up with this logo for something that was going on in PE. They had like an adventure race, and they asked my students to make flyers. And that's another something that we do in my advanced media class. All the teachers in the building know we actually have the nice color printer. And I like my students to not just do design for themselves, but to be able to help the school. And the students love doing it too. They like to see their work in the hallways and know that it's for a purpose. So they designed this logo as part of a bigger poster. And they said, oh, why don't we use this logo for the socks? Okay, so then they played with this logo a couple times, sent it back to the sock company. And then the sock designer came back to us and said, all right, well, and you can see on the bottom left, what if we put the logo on the top? Your mascot is an eagle. What if we have a drawing of an eagle? And then they kind of repeated the logo over and over in green. So the students took this design and they said, well, I don't know. We kind of like the way they divided the yellow and the green. We don't like how they repeated the little logo. So you can see like they went back and kind of typed their comments. And it was a long process to make these socks. They started with the idea in October. And actually, after going back and forth, getting ideas, etc., they didn't actually get the sock into production until March. So I think that was important to teach students, like, your first idea isn't always the best idea. And you're going to come up with 10, 15 different ideas before you decide on the one. And sometimes it's about the way that it looks. Sometimes it's about what's popular in terms of the people who are going to buy it. But sometimes it's just about the materials that you have and what works. We were dealing with the constraints of what this company could really do. So you see on the far right, these were the two best designs that the students had picked. But that was something that we reflected on. Like, the students had no idea when they started that it would take this long, that they would have to tweak their design. But I actually liked working with this company, because I think sometimes when I come in or a classmate comes in and says, oh, maybe you should change that, maybe you should change that, the student's inclination is say, no, it's good, let's just do it, right? But when they're dealing with a real world designer and there's a back and forth conversation, it's somebody other than me. The sock designer was kind of like a mentor for the students. And so that was a really powerful experience for them too, to actually deal with a designer outside of our school and get that experience of what is it like to be a client proposing something, but also the person kind of tweaking it over and over until they got it right. Okay, so another aspect, besides kind of the making of apparel, Another thing that we've changed this year to kind of allow for more maker activities is tinkering in the classroom. And this is a group of my sixth grade students. Their original curriculum was about photography, and they were working in different movie making programs to then take their photos, add a voiceover, and tell a story. And so that was their original curriculum. And then we always had some extra time where they make stop motion movies at the end. And I said, well, let's change this up a little bit. What if after they do their initial photo projects, before they start their stop motion, they have some time to just get to know some different materials, to kind of tinker and experiment and find out how things work. So knowing that we had these Little Bits kits that were recently donated to our library, we borrowed 5 Little Bits kits, and they're like starter kits, and there are 20 pieces in each one. One of the students had an interest in papercraft. If you haven't seen this before, you just look up papercraft. There's a ton of websites. The students can download these little characters. Some of them are regular characters or pixels. And it's kind of this intricate print where you print it out and you cut out the tabs, and then you fold the tabs so that you can create this 3D character out of paper. And actually the students always think, oh, I'll just cut this out and make it. But it actually takes a really long time, and it helps students kind of figure out how to put things together. We experimented with paper circuits, and then students also learned Scratch and using Makey. So what I like about Scratch is it was a nice introduction for coding at this level, and we actually started it around December when they do hour of code, and the students said after 1 hour of code, they were so hooked they wanted to do more. And I really like that Scratch provides the tutorials for them, so they're able to learn step by step, working with code, how to add sound, how to create characters. And even within Scratch, students were able to kind of find their niche. Some of the students who really like to draw were able to use the drawing features to create their own characters. Some students tended to be more interested in sound, and so they worked on creating beats, and there's some like loops already there. Others recorded their voices. So I like these bigger experiences where you can give a student a material or a software, and they can find their interest within it. And so you can see at this table, I gave the students a little bit, and with them came some activity guides, just simple ideas of how to put things together. And I would say every student and group approached it differently. The student on the left in front of us, he got really interested in role play. And I noticed this is a student who, when we go on our blog to report our activities, he doesn't like to write at all, but he's a really hands-on kid. So what he started doing after day 1, he figured out how to use all the materials. And then by day 2, he was doing this whole role play thing where he had the 2 fans on either side, and he created the system like you were going to an airport. And when you put your hand, there was a sensor there that sensed you were there, and so the fans would go on, and then as you kept going, something would light up. And so for him, it was like going through an airport, and each person would have to go through the terminal, through the fans, and get lit up. And so he played it like a game with his other peers. And I think for him, it was more about the role play experience than actually creating something. Like at the end of the day, he just took it apart, and the next day he did something else. So for him, the storytelling piece of it was really important. The student on the top left really wanted to build something specific. And this was a student working in papercraft. He had like a Minecraft character, and he wanted to make his eyes light up, and he was using different batteries and playing with the circuits in order to make the eyes light up when you press the stomach. So he had a really specific purpose that he was looking to use. And I would just say every student kind of finds their own purpose within it. And so what I've noticed with the tinkering, certain classes I think handle it better than others, but I like to give them just a couple days to experiment with the materials, find out how they work, and then decide how they want to use them. Do they want to tell a story and use it for play? Do they have a very specific problem that they're trying to solve? And some of the kids, after playing with it for a couple days, said, okay, that was fun, I want to do something else. And so certain classes for me that are able to handle that, I will give them materials and just let them experiment and kind of report on their findings. I see some of you are commenting on the locker stand. That is my makeshift iPad stand. I love it. They're like $10, and you can stretch the base apart. You see on the left side, we've stacked them on top of printer cartridge boxes to get the height. But yeah, we found that to be really successful. Okay, so after they've played a little bit, a lot of times the students will want to make something. So on the side left, you'll see Jacob, and he was taking the idea of those large fingers that you wear at sporting events, and he said, I wonder if I can make one that turns from side to side. So for him, that was his challenge. Which parts does he need to do that? On the bottom right is another thing he experimented with. He put his round paper on a motor and almost made one of those spin art pieces where he could touch it with a marker and watch it grow wider and wider. On the top right, I had a girl who saw the Makey piano, and she said, I want to build one. How can we do it? And so literally, we kind of just save boxes that we've gotten from orders at Amazon or when teachers unpack their classroom at the beginning of the year. And she used just copper tape and wire and the Makey. And I didn't really give them a lot of instructions. We talked about items that were conductive. And then I said, okay, how can you build this? And for this group, they actually came in during lunchtime to do that because they were so interested. And there's so many resources online that I think the other part of the makerspace for me is on the one hand, I like to provide students resources around the room like books or tutorials for those that need that structure. But for this group, they were so interested and independent in their working, they were able to just go online and find everything that they needed online. And to me, when we talk about literacy, I think that that's a big piece of digital literacy is being able to know which resources are out there, how do I find them, and then how do I use them to create what I want to make. So ideally for me, when my students leave 8th grade, that's what I want them to be able to do. I want them to know what's available and know how to continue doing this without a classroom setting. And so that's a really important piece that I try to build into all my classes. Even when we start out in a really structured way, to get to a place where we can open it up and give the students a little more independence so that they struggle and so that they have to be independent in finding things instead of just relying on the teacher to constantly give instructions. Okay, here's another student. This is Maya. And you can see Maya was looking at this resource binder here, and there was an idea in the binder that said, what if you created an animal? So she said, oh, I'm going to make a dog. And Maya also is another storyteller, so she had a whole story behind this dog, Shelly. And so you can see what she did. She just took a box, and she actually had the idea. She went home and found out what materials could she use. And she brought back the cups in the box, and then I had paper that she cut. She got cotton balls from the nurse, and she started to assemble her dog, Shelly. So she figured out, for her, the big problems were she wanted a wagging tail and eyes that lit up. So she had to play with the little bits to figure out how to do that. And then she had to figure out how to tape all these things together so that it would stay in place from day to day. You see she's added on the bottom right a blue button so that when you press the button, the eyes would light up. And that was something that we talked about. Not wasting the battery. Is there an on or off switch? How would she do that? And so this is something that Maya planned. And you can see on the top right, her friend Carol actually came in and helped her out. And that's the other thing that I love about the Makerspace is it's really flexible. So this was Maya's project, but one day she needed some extra help, so Carol came and helped her out. I like when the groups are kind of fluid, that students don't feel like they have to stay with their group the whole time, but that the space is kind of open to say, oh, today I want to see what's Maya doing? How did she do that? And what I would actually do sometimes too is when students were far enough on a project, I would have them present at the end of the class so that the rest of the class doing other things can learn about what she's doing and maybe she'll spark their interest. So we have kind of a sharing culture as well. And actually another piece that was really important, so a lot of people will ask, well, how do you assess a project like this when students are developing it all themselves? They're not always finishing it, how do you do that? And so what I have students do is document their process. And a little later, I'll show you how I've used Sparkpage and Sparkpost for that. What Maya did, she was interested in making a video. So she actually, and actually you could use a variety of tools, but she recorded herself just talking about the creation process. And so it was nice for her to get to walk through all of the things that she had done. She addressed her struggles, her challenges, things that she changed, and then she was able to present that to not only her class, but I've used it in classes that I've had since then. Again, just for students to see the entire creation process, that it's not as simple as just having an idea and making it. but it takes a lot of going back and forth and experimenting and finding exactly what you need. Okay, so here is our discussion on 3D printing. And what I will say about 3D printing, we did a pilot that summer. I think I told you about that, where I did a 2-week summer program, and only 1 week was devoted to 3D printing. And we found after using SketchUp and Tinkercad that Tinkercad was a lot more student-friendly, a lot easier for them to just drag forms in. So their very first year, I had the 6th graders just do an open-ended project. I said, create something in Tinkercad. And then with the second group, we said, oh, they need a purpose. So you can see the robot on the left. He actually has his arm holds a pencil. And so I actually use that to hold a tool. And then what we realized is that these characters students were creating were amazing, but they took a long time to print. This robot over here took about 2 hours to print. And we said that was really problematic. Not every student is going to be able to print. So what we realized, actually they came out with an app called MakerBot Print Shop. And what you can do is the students can actually either draw it by hand, or I've had students draw it in Photoshop. They use the Wacom tablet to do that. And what we had students do was just make a keychain. And that was something where they could draw something. And so I liked the idea that they were creating it. It wasn't just pulling ready-made forms, but that they were thinking about what they wanted it to be. Sometimes I had students use their initials, or we would pick a theme. And then from there, the prints only, we made them 1/8 of an inch thick. And the prints actually only took about 15 to 20 minutes a piece. So I was able to print for every student, every rotation. And to me, that was the most important, is that everybody should get a print. So you can see in the very middle, all these little S's. That was from our musical Shrek. One of the 6th graders, I made it like a design contest, one rotation. I said, we're going to design a keychain for our musical. Let's get a bunch of ideas. And then the students voted, and this is the one that they picked. So we made like 200, and we gave them to the entire cast of the musical. And then you can see just some of the other student designs on the top, right and left. So to go back and talk a little bit more about process, after the students had gone through this process, I wanted them to go back and explain it. So I had them make little infographics. So this is a student, Logan, who's a 7th grader. And the challenge that I gave this group was to make a Chute keychain. And you can see her final solution on the left. She drew her design in Photoshop because she was comfortable drawing in Photoshop. She used the MakerBot Print Shop app to take a photo. And then actually this app, you can download this design, and then wirelessly it will go straight into your MakerBot account. And if you don't have a MakerBot printer to print straight from their slicing software, you can download it as an STL file and just print it out. So I like it. I think it's really user-friendly, and it was easy for the students to do. So here is how, once Adobe Sparkpage came out, I love that it was a little more formal of a way for students to document their process, and it was easy for them to do step by step. So this is already like, I think, our 3rd rotation. So we'd spent some time learning how to perfect the keychain that we wanted at 1/8 of an inch and smaller than like 2.5 inches. And so students could focus a little bit more on not only creating it, but then documenting it. So I'm just going to switch over, let's see if this will work, to Adobe Sparkpage. This is Amabel, and here's how she used Sparkpage. Document, let's see if it'll come up here. Can you see it okay? Does that work? Okay. There we go. Great. Okay. So what I liked about this documentation process is that the students had already learned photography. And so as part of this, and you can see not all the students really focused on it, but we talked about taking photographs that would tell the story, that they're not just using the text to talk about step by step, but the photo has to tell the story. So here's Amabel here, and you can see like it was important that she got the 3D printer in it. Here's our computer. And so every student like did a different take, but that was something that we brought back at the end to talk about, like Is it not only clear and easy to see the word? So that was hard. Like they liked getting these black items in the background so that the white text would stand out. But looking at design too. So those were all pieces of this for sixth graders. So as you go, she says, she takes you through step by step. First, I do a sketch of the ice cream. I got my inspiration from the internet. Then I used a Sharpie. So she had to kind of go back and recount the steps. So for me as a teacher, this was a really easy way for me to see what the students had learned and how they'd learned it. And so she goes step by step. Here's how she used the iPad. Okay, it turned green. And what was so interesting, all the students used the same process, right? Like some of them went on the internet to get inspiration. Some of them used their initials. Like some of them told a story about how they got the idea for their keychain. But other students, just talked about the physical steps, but they all had different things to say about it. Like she's talking about how it turned green to see the parts that will get printed. Not all the students explained it that way. So it was really interesting to see which things the students picked up on. And it kind of also reflected back on my teaching. Which things did I emphasize with certain groups more than others? And I'll say that's kind of how I taught this. Like students worked at really different speeds. So I taught them in small groups. When one group was done designing, I would show them how to photograph it and take them back to the printer for kind of a 3 or 4 person demo while everybody else was still sketching. And then they would kind of come in waves. And what I also loved about this is that after that, once I had the first group go through and they'd gotten to this level here, I had like 3 or 4 students that had finished that could then go and teach the other students. So I think that that's another part of the idea of being a maker classroom is giving the students the expertise that they can go and then teach each other so that they become not only a community of learners, but a community of teachers. And so there's Amabel's. And then I'll show you a couple others just to give you a sense of some of the different ones. Here's Jahim's. And something that's so popular with my students, I'm sure with yours as well, they really, really love the emojis. And so that was something that we kind of talked about. Like, on the one hand, we're kind of changing the emoji. Like, it's a flat thing, and now, like, he had to figure out what the positive and negative space was going to be for this. And that was a little tricky because the heart is overlaid on the face. So we said, like, for that, as an artist, he's kind of transforming it. And for the students, that was one of the challenges, is dealing with the positive and negative space. But that was something that we also addressed later on. In terms of creativity, the fact that he just took an emoji that already existed, is that fair? Is that fair use? What if he would have created his own emoji? Could he have then taken this idea and expressed it a different way? And so that came up a lot. Actually, a lot of students, they were interested in illuminating letters for their name. And that was something else. They would go online and look at a picture and kind of copy it. And I said, but how can you change it and make it your own? And so that was something really important for them to think about. And I think that's a larger question for the maker community. There's so many things now online where you can just take the 3D print and replicate it. So is that fair? Like, shouldn't you have to change it a little bit the same way you would in Photoshop or anything else? And so that's a question that I like to talk about with the students as well. Okay, so here's his process. And so he gives a little more of his personality. I chose this photo because my friend said, it's totally me. I made it my screensaver so it wouldn't move when I traced it. So for him, I'll just say, like, that was hard. Like, he figured out that he could get the photo on his iPad, but then he couldn't take a screenshot and use it again. So in order to do that, he had to make it a screensaver. So in that way, he was problem solving just that little piece of the process. So then he goes through the steps again. And you see, like, we set the thickness and the size, so some students were more receptive. A lot of them were photographing a screen, and we talked about that a little bit, the light interfered. But you also get a sense of their personality. Like when they're telling you a story through Sparkpage, here he says, after 26 minutes, it was ready. My favorite part was taking the raft off of my 3D design because it gave me a feeling of accomplishment. That was really cool and interesting. So I think the kids kind of also gave feedback about the project and how they felt. And again, I think that's really important for them to acknowledge it, and as a teacher to kind of just see how students felt about the process. Were they frustrated? Did they enjoy it, etc.? Okay, so actually, I believe that this is being recorded. So these are actually on the Adobe Education Exchange, and so I have these student examples, and there's a lot more. So I'm not going to go through every student, but you're welcome to go back if you would want some other examples. Another thing I wanted to hit on, I know we're getting close to time here. Um, for me, student choice is really important. So something that I always like to say is that we set constraints that enable. I think if you just open up your class and say, all right, we have all these things, go create something, students, especially at middle school level, don't really know where to begin. So I like to give a general idea of what they're doing. This was the last project for the sixth graders, so they'd already had the experience of how my classroom flowed. So I told them they had to make a stop motion animation in Stop Motion Studio. So they had the process and the app, okay? But then they got to pick the materials that they wanted to use. So I introduced, you can see in the middle, they use an app called Tinkerplay, where you can create a character and then it prints in parts and you assemble it. And then we got those 3D doodler pens, and so they were actually able to use the filament to kind of color in their characters. And so they customized their character there. You have the students on the right. They pulled all their pictures offline and then just cut them out, okay, because they wanted their realistic basketball players. I had the student on the top left. She didn't really tell a story. You could see the boys on the right had a whole story about their basketball players that they storyboarded. She was just interested, this girl on the top left just wanted to show movement. So she was just playing with the crayons and making them appear and disappear one by one. The student on the bottom left was really interested in using modeling clay, and he also, I don't know if you saw the, what are they called? OK Go. The group did a video in zero gravity on a plane, and I showed it to the students as kind of an example of innovation. And so this student was really inspired by that. So you could see he printed a picture of a plane, and he's got his characters kind of flying in zero gravity. But I like to open up that choice for the students. I think it's important for them, after you've kind of set up basic tools and equipment and how they should work, for them to get to make their own choices. Because I think that's when they take agency. They're interested because they've chosen the materials. They feel like it's something that they really want to do, and they take ownership of it. And I think that that's really important for students as well. And because of that buy-in, I didn't really have a lot of behavior problems. All the students really wanted to work on this. And here's another example of student voice. I had a group of students that wanted a live Instagram wall. So they painted the wall. They set up a website where students would send in photos, and they had a theme each week. And again, students saw that modeled in the classroom, and they said, so if we have an idea, we'll bring it to Mrs. Kushner, and then we can make it happen. And I think that's something that we want for all of our students in a maker classroom, is to feel like they can come up with an idea and make it happen on their own. All right, that's what I've got.
Wow, really impressive stuff, Sherri. I actually just typed in as you wrapped up there, I just said, you're really empowering them. And I think if you look at the comments and the chat, it really feels like you are giving these students tools and confidence to make ideas tangible products. It's amazing.
Thanks.
For everyone who's tuned in here, we've had a couple I know leave, but be great to type questions into the chat pod. I'm gonna share them with Sherri, and she's gonna respond. So I guess I'll kick off with maybe one of my own here. At the beginning, you were talking about connections to libraries and community organizations. How do you suggest someone reach out to a library to make that connection? Is it just walking in the front door? Is it trying to network through administration? How do you do that?
You know what? It's funny. I think in a lot of schools these things are already in place. But it's just about personnel. Like for me, my librarian was already meeting with the public librarian all the time. And so knowing that they were doing these 3D printing, I went to my librarian and said, you know, I'd like to meet her next time she comes. Let me know. I want to hear about it. And that was it. And I think that that's something that's really important, is kind of also seeing what other people in your building are doing or in your district. Because I know for me, like I'm a media arts teacher, and there's only one of me at each school. Whereas, and the librarians have the same situation. But I know like our science and math teachers have like a large STEM team, and so they do a lot of STEM activities. And it's really important for us to just make time to find out what is everybody doing, what opportunities are there, and how can we overlap so that what they're doing in the class that maybe I can bring into mine or vice versa. And so I think that's kind of how it happens. But I know also just seeing what's available in the community, like the students will sometimes say, for instance, at our library, they have a program on Saturdays, and it's run through Northwestern. It's called a Fuse. So they actually have like set tutorials for students to learn materials. And a lot of my students were coming in and saying, oh, I went to the Fuse program, here's what I'm doing, kind of like when we did Scratch. And so I found out about it. And so that was another way in to just say, well, my students are doing this anyways. Let me meet whoever is running this program. And again, talk about some commonalities, some students that we both see, and figure out how we can harness all these great things for more students.
Great. Well, thanks for that advice there. Um, Kevin asks, where to next? What is the next challenge for you and your students?
Oh, great question. Well, I always have big plans. My principal makes fun of me. Like I'll pitch him an idea. He says, "Oh, I guess we're going to see that equipment next year," because he knows I write a lot of grants. So I actually had my eye on the Evanston Art Center in our community has a laser cutter for wood, and I said, "Well, that's a $10,000 machine. We'll never get one. What else can we do?" And so a colleague of mine at another middle school suggested a machine called a Carvey, which is a like a CNC wood carving machine, and that's at like a $2,000 price point. So I actually got a grant, and again, I saw that Evanston Art Center had this laser cutter. So I approached them and I said, would you be willing to host a free class if I get it, if I get the stipends underwritten for the staff through our foundation, so that these classes could be free and students could learn laser cutting. So they agreed. So I wrote a grant where we'll have 2 weeks of classes this August for students to learn the laser cutter, and then we're actually going to be getting the CNC machine next year. So after learning how long 3D printing takes, I think when we start doing the problem-based design learning where, for instance, students were working with the little bit and, they wanted to make a motor for a car. But the idea is like, if I'm going to make wheels and all the parts for the car with a 3D printer, it'll take a long time. I'm hoping that making it out of wood will be a faster solution. And this machine also cuts acrylic, so it opens up more materials for us. So I think that's our next big venture. Working with wood,
Interesting.
acrylic.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. The idea of like mixed materials, like mixed media.
Mm. Any other questions?
Yeah, and I had one. I saw in a lot of your work about a design feedback session being central to the activity and the learning. And I was wondering if you had advice you can give for facilitating those feedback sessions and teaching students how to build these skills.
Okay, well, I guess that's where I would come back to the constraints that enable. In my seventh grade class, when they learn Photoshop officially, um, we always start out with a little more structured exercises. And actually, I think I had my website up. I'll type it in here. You could see some examples of the projects. But we do an issue-based project where we focus on text and working with layers. And we just start with those couple of design things. And so they have something where it's issue-based, and so there's a buy-in from the students. But the actual process is limited so that they have to focus on working with text. They have to focus on working with layers because they need those really basic skills before they're going to just start designing posters or these other pieces to it. So I think that's important is kind of building that structure before you open things up. And then I think also on the flip side of that, in these more open classrooms, when a student has interest in something, I just think that that's something in the back of your mind that you point out, or even asking it as a question. Like you have this image that a student has created. Oh, I can't really see. What does that say? Oh, it's a little bit hard to read. Why is it so hard to read? And then the student has to say, oh, well, the photo's really bright and my font is white. Maybe I should change it. So I think just engaging students in dialogue, not only in a formal way when you're teaching, but informally as they create things, and not even just Photoshop, but things that they draw or that they create. And I will say, like in our sixth grade curriculum, we also talk about design with photography, talking about rule of thirds and balance and composition. And it's really important for my kids because it's not sequential. Like students could have me in sixth grade and not seventh. So I think we build in those basic concepts in every class at the very beginning of the rotation.
What were two major struggles that the students had, and how did you overcome them?
Oh, good question. Is there a specific project or just in general?
I think it's just in general.
Okay, so I'll tell you when we first started 3D printing, the big struggle, and I didn't really address this, so I'm glad you asked. When they started making these crazy things in Tinkercad, we talked a little bit about how something 3D prints. Like it's an additive process, it's building from the bottom up. And so if you've got a really small base and then your project is expanding, but it's not gradual, you're going to need supports. And so that idea of building the supports was one thing. But then when we actually printed something that had a lot of supports, we realized, oh, we can't just break it off. It doesn't work like that. We're going to need sharp tools. So then I got the tools and they started cutting away. And like one girl made this little Pac-Man with thin legs. And like every time the supports would break. So she said, oh, I need to make the legs thicker. And it was a hard thing for her. And this was, again, one of my advanced 8th grade students who I think is a little more persistent and can persevere, but it was frustrating. And so knowing that, I guess that's something that I wrestle with the keychains. You know, they're making a keychain, so it's 3D, but really it's a flat item that they've just extruded. And so you say, like, is that really teaching them 3D design? But I think it's nice that students are successful with it every time. That once they've designed something and they can create it quickly, um, and they can just pull off the raft. And so I'd like them to feel that success for their first time 3D printing, so that when they try something a little bit more complicated, um, they realize that it's going to be more of an investment. So
Mm.
I think that's one major struggle for the 3D printing. Um, let's see. I guess the other major struggle is persistence. I'll just use that. I really like. There's a book on. They call it teaching artistic behavior. I think the author Diane Jaquith and Nan Hathaway are into this movement through art education, and it's kind of about not just teaching choice, but teaching students artistic behaviors. That it's not just about creating something, but there's an ideation process. There's the failing. There's having to persist and having to try again and redesign. That these are all skills that are really important. And so I think just giving a lot of support for students to persist and to keep trying, even when it's frustrating, even when it doesn't work, or to seek out each other as resources so that they don't feel like, oh, I can't figure it out, tough luck. They've got
Mhm.
the other students in the class to help them.
Excellent. Well, Sherri, it looks like we're at the end of the hour here, but I just want to thank you again for such a great presentation, stimulating a ton of ideas and sharing a bunch of resources, and really how to do this in our own classrooms. So I think on behalf of everyone who signed in and today, thank you so much for a great presentation on maker spaces and maker activities in your class. I'll say for anybody who's still sticking around, we do have a couple questions here on a wrap-up screen I'll switch to, but I will say keep tabs on Sherri. We will be, as we said, we're recording this. We will be sending out the recording on the Education Exchange as well. She has some great resources if you look up her profile. She mentioned everyone, and